What are we talking about today, Nick?
We're going to talk about, I think it's the the fifth film of the Marx Brothers, titled to maintain animals in their previous movies. They had animals in their animal names in their titles. Yeah. So you had Animal Crackers, Monkey Business, Horse Feathers, and after Horse Feather was a big hit. It's actually pretty funny. They came up with Duck Soup. Which is slang at that time of something so easy to do that you can't screw it up. Well, guess what?
Yeah, so we'll have to talk about whether or not they screwed up the film. Join us today for Duck Soup. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
I almost did the black smear mustache for this show.
I couldn't wash that out. Save my life.
Hi, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for finding us. And for our loyal fans, sincerely thank you for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. Please leave a like or subscribe to the show. Tell your friends about the show. Yes, of course, we do have a Patreon. Check that out for some great content, as well as an opportunity to tell us what movies we could review in the future on this show. Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics' reviews as well as ours. And today we're considered what people consider Marx Brothers' masterpiece movie, the funniest one they did, Duck Soup.
All right. Hail, hail, Fredonia, the bankrupt country. In an effort to fix the nation, Rufus T. Firefly has been installed as leader. While he starts wars and lives the high life, he also contends with a duo of spies who can't quite figure out how to be his undoing.
So a little bit of backstory about the Marx Brothers. There's some great documentaries and books about the subject, but I'm not going to just kind of siphon from them, but a little bit. Their famous uncle, Al Sheehan, was a real popular vaudeville performer. And their mother was Al Sheehan's sister, who really wanted to be entertainer and kind of coached her sons to do it what she always wanted to do. They learned, and she was musically well trained, almost like Spielberg's mom.
Oh, okay,
like musically trained. So all of them learned instruments, but they all kind of preferred their own instruments. Groucho liked guitar, Harpo liked to play harp, and Juke on the piano. But through vaudeville, even when they were little kids, and they did it up to their 30s before they got into movies. And that's where a lot of the rehearsing, it seems natural, it seems pretty easy to do. Those sketches that they do are so well rehearsed. And so bing, bang, boom, because he's done it so many times.
I think what you're going back to, though, is the fact that we need a Fableman-style movie about the Marx Brothers at home. So.
Something like that. Something of them. Yeah, right. And the vaudeville act of the reason why they wear the costumes, outrageous costumes, because they actually, without it, they all look very similar.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny to watch these movies that Harpo is the oldest, and then Chico, and then Groucho is the youngest of all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is, because even like without, he did seem to age a little bit faster than his older brothers did. They all look the same, but he's definitely had the age on him when you saw him without the makeup. But yeah, it helps when you have four guys that look similar to have drastically different outfits, because they all have similar speech patterns, they all have similar kind of mannerisms even inside the characters. So it does help to give the audience something, especially on older kind of beaten up copies of this movie. It does help it age a little bit better.
Right. And they didn't get into comedy probably later in their vaudeville acts, that all of a sudden, if they started doing one-line jokes with their stage routines, that they finally become centered of a comedic grouping. So Paramount, they signed with Paramount Pictures. This is the last picture they would do with Paramount, because during the recording of this movie, they were in renegotiations with their contract. This is the Great Depression. And that would never go through. Actually, this would be the last one they would do with Paramount Pictures. They would go on to do with MGM.
Yeah, things were a little tight over at Paramount, especially because Paramount was one of the studios that was struggling the most, and they were staving off bankruptcy almost on a daily basis. It's crazy to think that Paramount, you know, the company that made Top Gun Maverick last year, has the Mission Impossible franchise. They're struggling. Decades ago, almost didn't happen.
It's almost as mirroring the same struggles they had before they made The Godfather.
Yeah. Paramount has always kind of had these ups and downs. There was a while about 10 years ago, too, where people were talking about who's going to buy Paramount because it's so low priced right now.
Yeah, the history of Paramount is the highs are high and the lows are really low.
Yeah, they are climbing the mountains and then sliding right back down those Paramount mountains.
Right. So Duck Soup is considered at the time kind of mixed reviews. People say it was the flop. It wasn't necessarily a flop. It just didn't make as much money as the previous 4 films they did.
Yeah.
And that is kind of a sting for you when you kind of feels like you're going backwards.
Yeah.
This is kind of time where it was considered an old-fashioned storyline because everybody's like, "Oh, you're talking about old-fashioned politics."
Yeah.
Which actually seems modern now. They're probably done with it before because they actually talk about things that will go on in the future. It's kind of weird that people complain it's old-fashioned politics that they're making fun of, but they're actually talking about what's going on now in something that's probably a little more comedic that we watch it now this day.
Yeah, I think what people tend to forget is that history and timelines are cyclical, and we will come back around to those topics. But I suppose at the time, film was in its infancy. We weren't sure if these films were going to last forever. People were making hundreds of films a year, and just like, are they going to last? Who's going to be watching this movie after it leaves the theaters? Nobody. So what's the importance of it? When we didn't realize, of course, the ability of physical media and streaming to keep these films alive and moving. It happens a lot where films will, people say this movie came out 10 years too late because it's talking about things that aren't important anymore. Well, they probably will be in about 20 years.
It's important now.
There. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And so that's why I consider it's almost paradoxical because when you say it's a political parody, political movies are always kind of paradoxical. Parodies are always apolitical.
Well, the Marx Brothers don't credit themselves with most of the politics coming out of the film. They actually credit the film's director, Leo McCary, who didn't really want to work with them. It wasn't his kind of a thing. If you look at his entire filmography, I assumed I'd see a couple more films in it like this one. It wasn't anything like that. He was hoping, actually, he heard rumors that the Marx Brothers were not going to work with Paramount anymore, and so he felt confident enough to pick up a new contract with them, and then things kind of came back together. The Marx Brothers wanted him to be in the film. He tried everything he could to kind of avoid it, but it was going to be happening. So he added a little bit more of his own satire to the film, kind of picked up that element to it, whereas the Marx Brothers were kind of just focused on the running little plot gags, and you can tell that in the picture.
The little stunts of what they kind of use for vaudeville.
Yeah.
The songs, and I'm sure it wasn't their initiation, but somebody wanted you to do the mirror scene.
Yeah.
Which is because you guys look so similar.
Yeah.
And you guys know each other so well. A spoiler, that's not the first time the mirror scene's ever been used. Harry Lloyd did it a couple of years before in the 20s and 30s, and this one kind of really catapulted. Almost like Chevy Chase starts Weekend Update, but then Dennis Miller and Kevin Nealon took it to the stratosphere.
Yeah, it does seem a case, because I watched the Harry Lloyd bits and pieces I was able to find online and compared it to this. It's almost like Harry Lloyd walked so that the Marx Brothers could run. They could take what was there and kind of refine it and make it a little bit better. It's interesting because I do think I've seen comparisons with the Marx Brothers films to films like Chaplin or to films that from why am I thinking of the general Buster Keaton?
Oh, Buster, right.
There's comparisons to those. I feel like it's actually more in line with Monty Python.
Yes.
Because the plots really don't matter in any of those films. It's more about the intricate little moments.
It's how the little gags,
yeah.
Shut up and take a card. Whatever do with the card, keep it.
Yeah.
I got 51 left.
And that's why my first experience with the Marx Brothers, and actually with this film, was probably about 20 years ago. The board game Seen It, which is a movie board game that came with a DVD. You'd put it in.
Oh, yeah.
Show
Who
you
the
a
heck
clip from
movie lover didn't want to play
Yeah. Well, and who didn't get to play because no one wanted to play with the movie guy.
Right.
But when you play a game of Seen It, that was one of the clips that come up with the mirror scene would come up before, and I think the scene in front of the carts with food on them, and the flower carts and stuff, that would come up occasionally too. Yeah. I got my first real knowledge of the Marx Brothers from that, and then I followed it up with I started working out, and someone did something called the Groucho Walk in a workout class that I was in that they learned online, which was you get on really low down to the ground, you hold your cigar, and you move back and forth for 4 steps. Yeah. So it's funny, I kind of skirted around Marx Brothers, watched a lot of their stuff on YouTube, then finally caught the movie.
And you can understand the influence of Bugs Bunny's influence strongly with Groucho Marx, with him, with the carrot, and especially with this movie. Of course, this means war.
Yeah.
And the smart aleck remarks of him probably outsmarting everybody in the world. But
right. I would see Pinky and Ciccolini also both had Elmer Fudd-ish, Daffy Duck kind of stuff. Like you can see more than just Bugs Bunny in there too. Yeah.
You're the spies who shut up shop looking for a Firefly, and your peanut stands right up below his office.
Yeah, exactly. You know, where it's there's elements of all of those kind of Looney Tune-esque things in there. I think more than just Bugs, it was across that whole group, and probably that's why the Looney Tunes had multiple people, and it wasn't just a Bugs Bunny thing. It was because you had the Marx Brothers, which was a group of people as well.
And the gimmick of them competing with the lemonade stand guy, and he's the straight man to their whole that famous hat scene that they did in vaudeville for many years.
Yep.
I'm sure they told him what you need to do and all this stuff. And you watch it, it's actually pretty funny because the guy actually knows the routine. He knows when to like get frustrated, because when you do three guys rolling around, you're not paying attention. You can't pay attention to all three at once, but he knows right when to focus on him.
Yeah, the film does rely heavily on the other people as well, which is kind of surprising because, again, you assume that four guys are going to kind of lift and carry the film, and the other people are all kind of stand in place. You get people like Margaret Dumont, who actually was in a couple of other Marx Brothers films, and
later on,
people would carry over in that way, and it was like, you know, it's kind of like, again, what Chaplin was doing at the time, or you'd have people that would appear in Monty Python films that weren't inherently part of that troupe, but they would just get kind of...
She's perfect for it because it's been documented many times before. She didn't get the comedy.
Yeah. And
she never understands. She would just go, Julie, why is everybody laughing? I don't get any of this. And she's like, just stand in your mark and I'll just keep going.
Yeah. You know, she was almost Leslie Nielsen in Airplane-esque, where it was like, that was maybe the idea was that, you know, she didn't get the comedy and she made it funnier because she wasn't part of the joke.
Yeah, because you can't be laughing on set when you're doing these things.
That's also true, yeah.
Also, like a lot of references of the silent era of gags, is Harpo has this unlimited amount of supply of things just pop out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those very silent film kind of era kind of jokes. He's got everything in his pocket. And I think there's one movie that somebody's like, tests him, you even got chocolate, and he pulls out a chocolate bar. So there's all, and then that reference of the hat, he used that in an episode of I Love Lucy. He showed that demonstration before. And then Zeppel. We talk about Zeppel. He's in this movie, but he's not the comic gag participant of it. He's kind of straightforward with this. But he does that one scene of when Harpo exits, and he comes in this hat.
Yeah. Well, he got a little bit more, like, I can see why he left the group, but I can also understand, like, he was I don't know, he could play handsome. He could play dapper in a way that they couldn't, and I do think he maybe...
Dapper's right.
He maybe wished that he got to be one of the funny guys, but he was very good at what he was doing as well, and so it's tough to say, like, I can't imagine I'd want to stay in the group where everyone else gets to do the fun stuff, but
and they're
important.
Off-set antics.
Yeah.
Because when you had the Marx Brothers on set, it was almost like herding 4 house cats. You just... how to get them all in one room to do the same thing.
Yeah, it was like Caddyshack without the drugs. You
right,
know?
yeah.
Just getting everyone on that set.
Chico was always late. He was gambling, drinking. Harpo was the same. He was out doing stuff. Also want to mention the hint of Harpo chasing girls is kind of almost nowadays almost seems out of place. But if you understand, he's playing it almost like a kid, almost like a dog chasing a car. He's not gonna do anything when he finally gets them. It's just the antic of chasing them.
Yeah.
It almost seems juvenile.
Because he's so outlandish, it's hard to place an age on him. I mean, he's a spy, so he's probably over 18. But at the same time, he's not really. It's kind of this loose, like...
Prepubescent, like, before puberty kind of a kid, like, I like girls, but I don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah.
It was one of those things where it was of the time. I mean, let's not try to
you
forget
can't pull that
Charlie
off,
Chaplin also had many younger women in his circles. Like, it was not okay. It was a sign of the times, and thankfully we're past it. It's the same thing like what we mentioned before filming, where there was like that song reference to where the darkies came from, where it was like inherently a racist song. That unfortunately mars scenes in this film because it exists. But it was of the time, and it's unfortunate that it does have to stay there. You know?
Yeah. So at crescendo, which I think is one of the best crescendos because it's so action-packed when you finally get to the war scene.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just boom, boom, boom with the jokes and everything. But if you watch carefully, if you didn't notice, Groucho changes his outfit to every American war.
Yeah.
That was ever, from cavalry to Civil War to,
Yeah, I got that. I got a little, like, almost like futuristic reference to, like, Forrest Gump, where Lieutenant Dan's family members had died in every American war, and he was just going to speed run the wars, you know?
Right. And then, of course, Chico, who only wanted to do what's best for himself. Yeah, Doug goes the other side. So,
yeah.
That's just a slice of all the information we can give for Duck Soup. If you want more, there's some, like I said, there's some great documentaries on YouTube. Also, some Mental Floss did a wonderful about the facts about Duck Soup as well. Just this movie, it's kind of unique that it's considered one of their downers, but now people praise it as one. I will put it as one of my top 3. It's not my favorite. It's probably always going to be like around the 3rd favorite Marx Brothers film of mine. So
fair enough.
Up next is our review. This is the first time you've seen it, right?
Yep, first time fully seen the film.
Fully seen the film. So up next is our review of the 1933 Duck Soup.
All right, so let me just say right now, I've seen a number of Marx Brothers like shorts and clips, and I've seen a bunch of that stuff, and I'm aware of them. This is the first time I've seen a Marx Brothers film in total, beginning to end. I stand by my assessment that the film's parts are stronger than the whole. Yeah. Much like Monty Python, I've often said that Monty Python's Flying Circus I prefer to the movies because they were intentionally sketches.
I don't really care what they're going after in North by Northwest. If they're going after some kind of microphone.
But see, I'm invested in that story a little bit more than this one. Yeah. Marx Brothers, I think that's one of the big differences for me is like when I see comparisons to Chaplin, is I see Chaplin's films as the bits are still part of the story.
Right.
This is one where you can't care about the story because the story is ultimately meaningless. Yeah. There's a number of great scenes in the movie.
It's slices of individual great tastiness that you, as the whole picture, you're just fondest of the slice that you got.
Yeah. And so I think the movie lives or dies based on your reaction to the brothers themselves. And I thought a lot of their moments were really funny. So the film did succeed for me. It's just that, when I look at, it's not about the story in this one at all.
No. It's about the gag and how we get there.
Yeah, and you could disguise this story as any other story. The gags would still be there. They'd still be some really funny stuff. I think my favorite bit in the film, outside the mirror gag, the mirror gag is awesome. Yeah. My favorite bit in the film is Pinky cutting everything with the scissors that he sees. And
that's why the Zeppo hat works.
Well, it's funny because it pisses me off so much. Every time I see it, I didn't even laugh. I was just like, stop doing it.
And then the guy with the hair.
Yeah.
It's just almost like a obsessive compulsive. Any opportunity I get.
Yeah.
I got to do it with the scissors.
Yeah. It reminded me a lot of Martin Short's Clifford, because he was kind of like a kid in the movie in the 90s where he would just kind of just do whatever he could to piss you off. Like, oh, you're talking, I'm going to stick my finger up your nose real quick.
Right.
Like, he just did it just to piss people off.
Right.
And there's a certain kind of love that I get for that kind of comedy. Never do it to me, but I do appreciate it.
But it's that comedy timing that they always knew about, where a joke works. The whole, I need my Excellency's car, and the punch that he always drives away. And then, you're not going to fool me the third time. Well, we already know what's going to happen. Right.
It caught me off guard.
Oh, it got
you right now. Right. I think maybe it was because they played it just enough where you thought the joke was over.
Right.
It reminds me of the Daniels talked about with their film Everything Everywhere All at Once, where they didn't want to do a hat on a hat because that joke, once you figure out the joke, you're anticipating the joke. And so their idea was hat on a hat on a hat on a hat. So to the point where you don't even understand where the joke's going anymore because we've twisted it so many times. And that's kind of what's at play here to a lesser extent, is that they do the same bit over and over again to the point where you've given up trying to figure out what's happening with it.
Right. Even though I'll give you a job at the Mint.
Yeah.
And you don't you got other flavors. So it's always it's almost like you throw the pitch and see what you do with it.
Yep.
And that's what Groucho works best is you throw me a pitch and he knows a counter so fast.
Yep.
Almost insulting. Then you don't even know what that is. Just get insulted.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like Duck Soup and the Marx Brothers in general do feel like the comedy has aged. Like you have to get yourself in the mindset of the comedy. Right. And I keep going back to this Chaplin comparison. I showed a Chaplin film to my niece and nephew who were 7 and 9 at the time. They both got it. They both got really involved in kind of the comedy of that because I think that comedy has aged well. I do think Duck Soup is comedy of a time.
Yeah, where you fit depression, where you are able to get into the mix of the elites and the aristocratic and the political powers.
Yep.
But there's an opportunity to get in there, you just trash the hell out of them.
Yep.
And the people, ordinary people, love it.
It should be noted too that this is a great example of punching up. When we talk about comedy, there's that idea of we don't make fun of special needs people. We don't make fun of people for things they can't choose. We don't make race comedy in that way. We don't do that because people can't choose that, and honestly, that's punching down. That's punching down at people that don't deserve it. You punch up in comedy because those people deserve it. And I think that's something that we've had in a lot of conversations about comedy recently is who is it okay to make fun of? This is a great example of punching up. And I think that's why it works really well for that, is because everybody in a position of power kind of sucks.
And they only bully Harpo at the end. The brothers do.
Oh, yeah. Because he's the leader. You know, so it's kind of there, you know?
Yeah, Harpo. All right, we pick you. Go out there, and we'll think of what a sucker you are for.
Yeah.
The bowling is among themselves. So, it's considered one of the classics. AFI put it as one of their top 100 best films of the 20th century. If you haven't seen it yet, I think even though it's old-fashioned, I think it translates it well. You're going to understand a lot of the jokes. A lot of them are a little more dated, but you understand the flow of it and understand how well rehearsed they are, to the point that I think they can just do it in their sleep and it'd be still funny.
I think it's a case where if you've never seen them before, do what I did, which is get yourself appetizers. Watch clips from short films. Watch bits and pieces of what they've put together to get yourself almost like fine-tuning your mind to what that comedy is, if you're not accustomed to that era and that style. Because that era and style don't exist in modern comedy. I think if you give yourself those appetizers, it creates an understanding of what comedy you're about to see.
I think you're right about it. You have a little bit of appetizers before you get the full meal to appreciate it.
Yeah, because that made me feel a lot better watching the film. Because I think it goes about 10 minutes before we actually get a gag in the film.
That's the only minus I have the film. I always fast forward the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, there's a lot of setup to I was like, should I be taking notes on what's going on? There's a lot of stuff happening.
That's a whole long for one joke. That's a whole 10 minutes just to get one joke. He's on time, and then he's really...
Yeah, and the constant repetition of the Fredonia thing.
Yeah.
My only bits and pieces were that some of the comedy with the age didn't land as well for me. And again, this is a first viewing. I think a lot of this kind of stuff is, you know, when I see it all collected again a second time, I might think differently. But I love the pace of the movie. Yeah. I love that finale, that worst. When we finally get to that part of the movie, it's a breath of fresh air because we've spent so much time in one kind of zone.
Yeah, and they all get to shine in their own personal way. Nobody's leaning on anybody. Everybody gets their own standout of how to be funny, as well as the other.
I also want to point out, too, this film has some great, not at the beginning so much, but as the film goes on, has some really great editing. It's really hard to edit comedy because what do you leave, what do you choose to keep in, what do you don't. The film was actually edited by Leroy Stone, who would go on to do the editing for The Big Clock. A film that I do think has strong editing, especially as it gets to the end.
It gets to the end.
Yeah,
yes.
I don't think the first parts of either of those films are as strong as the endings, and it's really
same
interesting.
Thing as,
but he never really recovered from editing the beginning of movies, but he made great endings.
Who would have thought my biggest laugh would be talking about the editing when we talk about Marx Brothers? So,
yeah.
If you didn't know Groucho, his famous line when he was in New York Friars Club roast, wanted to put him as a member, he wrote back, "I don't want to be a member of a club that will want me as a member."
Well.
And that's the whole gag.
Yeah.
All right. Have we seen Duck Soup?
Yeah. Please let us know down in the comments section below. We do want you to be a member of our show, especially if you don't want to be. Yeah. So please consider letting us know maybe your favorite Marx Brothers gag or moment that you particularly remember from their sets, because they did so many feature films.
Nobody's going to ask, but 2 years later they'll make a Night at the Opera, and that's the funniest one to me. That's the best one.
There you go. Do you want us to cover Night at the Opera? Let us know down below, or maybe click on that Patreon link and force us to, because there's so many movies and there's just not enough time for us to pick all of them. So let us know that you want us to cover a film by clicking on that Patreon link down below. We do appreciate it. Like Nick mentioned,
keep the conversation going. Talk to us on Twitter or Instagram, or leave a comment down below.
Absolutely. So thank you guys for joining us so very much. Yeah. You can find all of my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
You can find my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts.